the biggest sort of payback of, being comfortable with who of the client and taking the exploration there is you get to understand the learning styles of the client, and which is so important because coaching itself is a learning journey. And, some people learn with emotions from the head, from the heart, some learn from their head, some learn from their gut, some learn from their body. It is just so important to understand where that learning comes. And so if you have somebody who is more head centered or, more gut centered, then you play to that style.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining in from. Welcome to our webinar today. Good to see you all here. Our webinar today is from the Masters in Coaching track. You can see our wonderful Cindy here and our special guest today, Vijay Lakshmi, both master coaches here, and we're going to be speaking about coaching the who and the what of the client. So we'll wait for everyone to join in. And before we begin, I want to also just take a couple of minutes to share a few logistical details with you all with regards to our webinars. So starting February, our webinar timing is going to be 7:30 p.m. IST. So it's still going to be the same 1 hour webinar, but we're going to have it from 7:30 p.m. onwards. Hope you all are happy with the change. We've done it so that we can have many of you from different countries join in, because we've had lots of people tell us in the past that they couldn't attend the live webinar and they wanted to be a part of it. So keeping our global audience in mind, we are introducing this change, and we'll keep you updated. You can follow us on our socials on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, where we'll keep you updated on all that's happening with our webinars. But please do note that we'll start at 7:30 from next Wednesday onwards. And while we are at it, I also want to share that this is the webinar that we'll bring to you next week with a special track on coaching specializations, where we'll explore paradigm of love and relationship. We still have guests coming in. Do share with us on the chat box where you all are joining in from. We'd love to know who you are, where you're joining in from, which country, which city. Good to see a lot of people coming in now. Hi, Johnny. Hello, everyone. And we'll just begin in about a minute. I also wanted to share this super exciting course that we have coming up this Saturday at Cocharya, which is on Eastern philosophies and coaching, a course which is very, very popular. So I thought I'll take the opportunity to also share the details with you all. So it's with one of our trainers, Komal Smriti, PCC and SP. So join in if this course interests you, or to spread the word in your networks. So we have people coming in from different places. Do share with us where you're joining in from. Would love to know. I think participants should be able to share. Yes. Let's see. Cindy, can you see the settings? It's everyone.
I can't see everyone. Well, how come?
I'm going to just quickly check that.
Make me co-host these.
Yeah. I'm going to just do that.
Sorry, Kiva.
Yes.
There we go. Now I can see it. So I was talking to you and Vijay and thinking it's everybody else.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome again, Vijay Lakshmi. I'm going to hand it over to Cindy from here.
Vijay, she could have just handed over to you, right?
Hi. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Go ahead, Vijay.
When I said I'm going to duck that, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So lovely to be with you again. And this is our first Masters in Coaching webinar for the year. I hope 2023 rises up to meet all your expectations and dreams. And as for coaching, we'll continue doing Masters in Coaching webinars to increase our skill set and curiosity in coaching. Today's webinar, as you know, is all about the who and the what of the client, coaching the whole person of the client. And in today's webinar, we will explore both the who and the what. We'll tell some personal stories and, of course, want to hear yours too. And as we go along, we'll explore how do we do that? The hows of coaching, the who, and the what. We'll also deep dive into some masterful pieces of skill development. So it's a bit for everybody. Did I miss anything, Vijay? To frame.
Yeah. As I was just thinking about this topic, Cindy, this is what we cover in most of our coaching education, right? Really focusing. And I was just wondering what from maybe, 65, 120, whatever the number of hours of that do we bring into this 60-minute session? And because I think it's such a vast topic. So I'm wondering what may be of greatest interest or value for everyone in this room.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear that from you. What do you want from today's session? What value do you want? What do you want to take away? See, we know the topic. We know what we're all discussing. Let's do some 3.2. What do you want to take away today?
A refresh of coaching, the who. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. I can see lots of our regular names on the participant list, and welcome to all those who is joining us for the first time. And you all are most welcome to share anything that's on your mind. We are talking about the who and the what, which means all culture, context, environmental aspects are honored in today's webinar. So Vijay, let's you and I dive in. While people type on the chat box, let's you and I dive in.
Sure. So I want to start. Sorry, go for it, Cindy.
No, you go.
Just a thought. I was actually thinking, right? Conventionally, we think that a client comes into coaching, right? Session 1, session -1. And sometimes they have very specific topics or, if I may say, presenting issues that they want to bring into coaching. And we think that, that's really the what. That's really the what of the service the coach comes in. I mean, the client comes in with. But it always strikes me there's a bit of this dichotomy, and I think that's where it's so important to really deep dive into and be mindful of the who and respect that who all through the coaching engagement, which is, I think, the primary definition of coaching. Right. And I invite everyone here on the webinar, and for those of you who are, I do see a few people who I know are not coaches who are here. So for everyone's benefit, coaching is defined by ICF, is a thought-provoking and creative process, really to enable, that inspires a client to maximize his or her personal and professional potential. So if you go back to the larger why of coaching, It's not necessarily to resolve, or let's say to find resolution to narrow issues. But I have not seen too many clients who would come and say, you know what, I want to maximize my potential, or I want to be a better version of myself, right? I want to self-discover. I mean, I know that there's some themes which come like that, but rarely, right? It would be more like, I want to be a better leader. I want to have better presence. I want to be a better team player, right? I want to have better fulfilling relationships. And
I want to grow my business.
yeah, you know, and so I've often wondered, you know, while I was beginning out as a coach, saying, how does this then connect to what is supposed to be the definition of coaching?
Absolutely. Yeah. How does that connect? Because you spot on. No client comes there, or very few, and say, today I want to really work on my potential and I want to maximize it. It's always some goal. And as you're exploring some goal or theme or area of development, as you begin to explore that, so much more shows up as change, internal change in the client. And it's this internal change that we most often refer to as the woo of the client. There's something going on inside. It's a slow process. Ends when it comes to woo of the client and how we display curiosity in responding to the woo of the client. You'll always get a sense of reflectiveness showing up. Some silence, and questions would be asked one at a time, giving the client enough time to think and reflect. So working with the woo of the client in what they want becomes a fairly slow process. And it's in that slowness that client begins to think, reflect, and figure out something more inside them. You know, all those little glows they have inside them begins to shine brighter and brighter. And that shows up as potential. And that helps them then move forward to successfully achieving the goal they want, an external value or the what of the client. So there's something happens inside, or the client comes with something on the external, and as you explore with them, it goes inside, and the value add is felt externally again.
Yeah, absolutely, Cindy. And that takes me back to one of the things, you know, early on in coaching, you know, I learned that, and a lot of people may know this, right? Clients are creative, resourceful, and whole. Yeah, and I
No
think
doubt.
that's the foundational philosophy of coaching. Even today, when clients come in and say, "So you're not going to give me any answers," you know,
No.
and after a while, they figure it out that, you know, this person is going to be like that, and then they become a little gentler and they say, "But you know, I think I'm able to come up with my own answers." And I think therein lies the power of the coaching process. So if clients need to be able to tap into their innate wisdom and resourcefulness, I think who the client is really needs to be honored, you know, along with all their hopes, dreams, and aspirations.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, Vijay. What does the woo of the client include?
Yeah. So I want to just dip into the ICF core competencies, right? You know very well, Cindy, and a lot of friends here on the webinar know I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan simply because I think it's just so simplistic. It's minimal, and I think especially the new competencies, you know, are quite, you know, quite commonsensical, I would say, right? So they sit well. And if you really look at, you know, the 8 competencies that are there in the revised core competency model, constantly across competencies, starting from the very first one, which is demonstrating ethical practice. There is a reference to a client's identity, environment, values, beliefs, experiences.
Yeah.
So in a way, I think it's an amalgam of all of these at different proportions at different points of times that actually, if you were to paint, close your eyes, and this is an exercise, I would do, and I'd love to share about it, that, there is the client who comes, right, with all their labels. What is their background? What is the work they do? Family context, geography, everything, right? All of that stuff. But that's not the real person that you're working with as a coach. So I used to do this pen picture visualization, right? Close my eyes and say, can I imagine this person through very different lenses, right? Who are they? What is their life perspective they hold? What is the sense of value systems they bring with them, right? What are the life experiences that they've gone through? And that is the real client you're working with. And the moment you're able to connect with that real client, which I call simply the who of the client, I think the journey becomes so much more meaningful, and the speed with which client moves ahead towards growth or any of the potential maximization is so much more. So I think this to me composes who the client really is, beyond their labels and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as we go through, I mean, you're talking about the core competencies. What is, I was going to say, let's share that slide and talk about the who. Should we do that now?
Yeah, we can, Cindy. So I think it'll just help with a little bit of framing and contexting. And I must say, folks, that, this is not any original content, but it's just a bit of plowing through the competencies and trying to make sense and bring it closer and put it and, help us all, I think, understand the whole a little better. This was done for self-learning, but, I'm just going to share this here. So if you really look at these 7 boxes, right, I think in pretty much every competency, there is a reference, or you can see that soul of the client, right, that person behind. And each of these competencies, which essentially, I mean, at the end of the day, what is a competency in the context of coaching, right? It's the how. It's how the coach shows up, how the coaching is done, right? So if you see, there is a reference starting, and I mentioned about ethical practice, just being sensitive to the world of the coach, world of the client, is the starting point to even be conscious and sensitive and be mindful. And I would say this often happens even at the pre-contracting stage, right? Just getting a sense. And that's also a place where if there are very strong value conflicts or you feel something not sitting well, that's a good time to explore and call it out. And then I think the new competency, which is embodies a coaching mindset, I think a big favorite, certainly, Cindy, for you and me, and I'm sure a lot of people here, is really about the mindset of a coach and coaching, right? And that's where, if you see, there's a reference to influence of culture and context. And I can't say this enough. Context is everything, right? Context makes people show up in ways that would even surprise them. We can come back to that later, if we want to explore that a little bit more. Moving into the next competency, which is this whole thing about creating an environment of trust and safety. Here again, right, it's not just enough to be sensitive to the client's identity, values, experiences, but also, proactively and actively seek to understand the client within this context. And similarly, at every stage of the coaching, demonstrate that respect for their identity, their perception, language even, right? And I think meet the client where they are. This is the who. Similarly, Cindy mentioned about the uniqueness, right? I really believe every client has this special gift in them. Most times, they don't want to go there. And sometimes they don't even think there is one. So I think getting into the who puts you and them in touch with that special human being inside, who from whom all the resourcefulness will come. Moving on to CC. Go on, Cindy.
Yeah. 1 minute, you were talking about uniqueness. So participants, I was going to say coaches, they, when we talk about this client, this human being that we refer to as the who of the client or the old person, and when we make reference to their uniqueness, what exactly are we talking about? What makes a client unique? What makes you unique? What do you think? What makes you unique? Yeah, context, identity, culture, yeah, experiences, definitely values. Innate nature, of course. Wonderful. So it's all those experiences, anything that influences you or guides the way you think, create, relate, view your world, or how do you want to show up in the world? All is informed by exactly what you put on the chat. Your context, identity, environment, experiences, beliefs, spirituality. That's what makes you unique. Sorry, Vijay.
No, I think what you've touched on is so important, because on a different note, I feel this is also something as coaches we often forget. That for every coach that there is in the world, there is that innate uniqueness in each of us. And
Absolutely.
It's so important to get in touch with that, and which is so precious, isn't it?
Yeah. That's why clients are attracted to particular coaches, right? There's something in that coach, there's some uniqueness in the coach that stands out.
That's right. So just moving forward, and I just quickly skim through the references and the competencies. I mean, simply to make a point that I think our competency model, which guides how we coach, is so focused on the real person and the who of the client. If you really look at the PCC markers, which is really a guide to assessment. It talks about coach acts in response to the whole person of the client. In fact, the word who itself is there, which is really powerful, right? Because I think the moment you can get in touch with that and your questions, right? I mean, powerful questioning is another favorite topic. We won't go there today, but even those questions, when it's guided by the who, the way it falls, the way it lands, even the harshest of questions land so gently. And that's when you know who this client is and use a style and a language and a way of presenting it that seems very safe for the client. So the same question can land so differently on two different clients.
That's why two coaches are unique, right? No two coaches will ever coach alike.
Yeah, absolutely. And there again is the curiosity. Curiosity is again another very important trait in the coaching toolkit. And the coach demonstrates curiosity. So it doesn't say to learn more about the issue, right? And there's a reason. It's demonstrating curiosity to learn more about the client. Have you ever wondered why it does not say, that the client goes, completely deep diving into finding, get to the bottom of the issue? it's actually not important. Right? Because I think clients will get there themselves. But it's really important to know as much as you can about the client who's trusted you implicitly.
Yeah. Because clients are the masters. I mean, we just spoke about how unique they are. And honestly, they are the master in their life. They know everything there is about their lives. As coaches, all we got is a little snapshot of their lives when they come to coaching. It's just a snapshot. And the only way to know more is to be curious about the client and what they're offering. And in that process, what are they offering regarding what they want from the session or in relation to what they want from the session? And in that process, so much more shows up. I think you're going to dive into the active listening.
Yeah, that's the one I think that really talks about the who of the client again, right? What I said, while communicating, using this understanding and right, it's not that the first two sessions, you do like 100 questions and you find out the entire life history of the client. That's not discovering the who. It is the who as it surfaces. To the extent the client wants to reveal, right? It's not one of those things that can be rushed. The unraveling has to happen gently and slowly to the pace with which the client is comfortable. And as that happens, with every progressive session, you understand the client a little bit more. And so even the quality of your questioning, and I found this as a practitioner, sometimes, that little bit of awkwardness that's there in session 1 and 2, by the time I think we're at session 6 or 7, we do away with a lot of the prelude and, the closures and everything, right? We are able to dive right in. That's because we have built that understanding.
Yeah.
And the other two questions also, right? Questions are based on what you've learned about the client. And, finally, the coach exploring about how the client perceives themselves and their world. It's not just themselves, right? What sense is this human being, what meaning? At the end of the day, our questions are all about meaning making.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what meanings has the client made of a certain situation? So I want to share a small example here, Cindy. I remember there was one coaching engagement where we were working. I mean, I was working with the client on some, I would say, sensitive topics. And I think I read too much into it because my own upbringing, my own value system, my own cultural background made me attribute a certain meaning to it, right? It was an issue of laws. And for me, I gave it so much of importance, right? And I kind of stayed there without realizing, or rather when I realized that the client views the same laws, the same, the same situation so differently.
Yeah.
And I could not have asked about it, right? This is not a question you can ask the client. So how important is this? I need to sense that. So even that meaning making about how clients see a particular incident, and there could be a cultural influence, there could be a systemic influence, there could be a generational influence. For example, losing a job for a certain generation and a certain point of time in a certain culture is very different, perceived very differently from people who come from a very different time and place. And I think it's important to understand that.
Agreed. So are we diving into evoking awareness?
Yeah, and I think when we've done all this, really, when every time we work with the client to evoke awareness, which is really that self-discovery, right? Knowing more about their issue, knowing more about the what, knowing more about the who. And this is where, again, it's very important. There's something called client experience, and that's what I spoke about, right? Understand the client's experience before, you go and ask, or you go in a direction which you think may be useful. Maybe it's quite useless for the client. So it's very, very important. And whenever in doubt, I think it's okay to ask it in a way saying that I perhaps don't know. Can you just help me here? I think I'm going in a very different direction. And there's only one thing I want to talk about, Cindy, in evoking awareness. And that's such a beautiful point if you really look at it, right? Coach asking questions to help the client go beyond their current thinking and feeling to new and expanded ways of thinking, not just about the issue, but about themselves. And therein lies growth for the client.
Yeah. This one, Vijay, this competency, there's a beautiful movement to it. It's a lovely wave. It's moving from current to beyond, something more, either new feelings, new thinking, new awareness. There's a movement in it.
Yeah, there is. And just to round things up, competency 8, which is about facilitating that growth for the client, and I kind of talked about it, as in evoking awareness as well. It's about then integrating all these, new awareness, insight, learning into what, right? Into their worldview and behaviors, perhaps to enable them to be better versions of themselves. And I think that's where the beautiful rounding off comes, right? We started with the definition of coaching, and we were wondering, how do we connect from a set of issues the client brings in to that ultimate growth, which somebody experiences in that time working together through the vehicle of coaching, to simply be better versions of themselves. And I think that's where CC8 also talks about this. Even at that stage, you're so mindful about who is this person that you're partnering with. Imagine
go ahead, Vijay.
Now imagine you and I were in a partnership, right? And I'm not talking about a coaching partnership, any other partnership. We had a business partnership. If I really did not know you beyond your skills, your talents, and what made you tick, what got you down, what got you concerned, what got you high, do you really think we can build that partnership in a solid way?
That's a good question, right?
And I'd invite everybody to think about this. Yeah, I mean, your different partners, your life partner, your business partner, any other kind of partnership. Just imagine not knowing or not being in touch with the evolving nature of this human being. Can it really allow that partnership to dance and flow? So I'm going to stop my screen share, Cindy, and I just want to add one more point that, the new competencies really places a lot of importance on much needed, I would say, cultural, systemic, and contextual awareness in the space of coaching. Yeah. We never coach in a vacuum.
Yeah. And coaches, just to the coaches on the call that are in touch with credentialing or wanting to go for credentialing or in a coach training program, you will notice that wherever there is mention in your competencies and markers of the who of the client, for example, we just spoke about how competency 8 facilitates clients' growth. And it talks about the coach will invite the client to explore or state the learning on the who of the client. What is the client learning about themselves? You will always find a follow-on. How will that learning help the client to their goal or their situation? So you will always find some kind of a follow-on from the who into the what, a relationship of the who to the what and the what to the who. So even in this who and the what for the client, there is always this dance happening. And it's not like because I asked about the who, now I gotta go next question into the what. You could do a few questions on the who, and then it'll occur to you, so how is this all related to what the client wants? And you can bring that right back or make reference to the goal you're working on. So even with the evoking awareness, where there is the space to explore new thinking and new feeling on the who of the client, it follows on with new thinking and new feelings around the what the client wants.
There's a lovely question, Cindy, in the chat box. You might
okay,
want
let's explore that.
Take that, and I want to hear your answer to that first before I give my perspective, which is about, and two questions there, right? I think the last one was from Sai Kodai. For coaching young adults 18 to 24, what kind of training practice would be useful, even if one has experience in coaching organizations for a very different audience? And I saw a similar question from Cynthia as well, as coaches who come from different generations. How can we sensitize ourselves to the variety of generational challenges that clients may face?
Absolutely. You go for it.
I wanted you to, because I thought you would share that nugget from your early experience of how you actually coached some really, really senior folks from a very different industry, and you believed you could absolutely do it, and I think you showed up with flying colors.
Yeah, I always said yes for everything because I always believed I could coach. And what learnings I would have, like sitting in a session and wondering, my client is talking for 40 minutes nonstop. There is no opportunity for me to even ask, what is it you'd like to work on in today's session? And what an eye-opener that is, right? Because if they can't get all out, how can you set a goal? If you're sitting with a whole lot of issues, you're not thinking about what is my goal. You're just thinking about, I need to resolve some things inside me. And that itself becomes a part of the session outcome or session goal that the client wants to work on before they can actually move on setting future focus goals for themselves on that topic. One of my biggest learnings came from coaching senior leaders within a space where they did most of the talking, and around maybe session 2 or session 3 would go, I think we have some goals to work on. Let's get on with it. But it was all about the who of the client first. And I learned that the hard way, without having an agenda of sitting and thinking, this was a session I cannot count for my MCC. There was no goal in the session. It didn't feel like a session. Of course, it takes some wisdom. When you, in hindsight, think about it. It takes wisdom to figure out that all that is a part of coaching. Let's get back to this question. I think I lost track of it there.
No, I was, the question was, especially if you don't have a past background, or, it comes from the client is from a very different generation or place that, you have experience with, then how do you undergo training practice? So my short answer to that would be, and this is a little counterintuitive, right? Especially when you consider other professions like maybe consulting, etc. In fact, I think the lesser you know, the better, because you go in with absolutely no preconceived notions. So, for example, when I had to coach, a 16-year-old, one of my youngest clients, I knew I was making some mistake. And the mistake was simply that I thought I knew how 16-year-olds behaved and thought. Yeah, I mean, I could be so off the mark because every 16-year-old is so unique. Of course, there are some patterns, maybe, for a generation, but I think that kind of holds you back.
Yeah.
In fact, when I look at, parallel with executive coaching, often it is said that industry experience makes a huge difference. And, I'm aware that perception is there. But I've also personally felt, and this is a very honest disclosure, the lesser, I mean, I know about an industry. In fact, when I know nothing about it, I just show up so much more coach-like. I mean, I just show up so much more effective as a coach, because I'm really going back to that innate, I'm working that curiosity muscle that I have, right? I ask the most basic of questions, in a way with vulnerability, absolutely accepting that I don't know this, but hey, I am a master at my craft. I don't know your world, but I would love to know your world. So would you give me your hand for me to know your world? And it's beautiful, the possibilities. So all I'm saying is, it actually, it's a good place to be if you don't know very much. But that being said, I'm not trying to duck the question. One good way I've found beyond of coaching to understand a certain sector or a certain group of people, etc., is simply in your daily life. I think be in touch with those people and just listen, with absolutely no agenda in mind. I call this agenda-less listening. Even as a coach, you have an agenda when you're listening, right? Because you're not just listening to listen, because after that listening, there is a certain set of actions, that you move ahead with based on what you've listened to. But sometimes agenda-less listening is beautiful. It's just so empowering. Often we don't get opportunities to do that, but I find one of the best ways to get to know somebody is to just listen without an agenda. I'd strongly suggest to give that a shot.
I saw that somebody's hand was raised and it went down. I'm sorry that we didn't pick that up.
Yeah, I think Smita is raising her hand. No, sorry.
That's Cynthia.
Okay.
Yes, Cynthia, that's right. Cynthia, did you have a question?
Cindy Vijayalakshmi, while Cynthia is typing her question, there are 2 more questions on the chat box. If you could please take those. I've posted those.
Sure.
On the chat box.
What is the true meaning of the shift in being? Is it really a shift in being or just being the authentic self?
It is a shift in being for a few reasons. When you discover there's something new about yourself, a new thinking, a new way of feeling, a new awareness that's showing up, there's something illuminating about that. Something like feels a sense of relief or energized. And in that space of feeling more, that illuminated feeling, you are motivated to do something different related to the goal that you want. You take that action, that new action that perhaps was holding you back for quite some time. And that gets you back on track or on a movement to achieving your goal. And it isn't that your way of being has shifted or your energy has shifted, contributing to your way of being shifting. It's a beautiful dance of all, this old person scenario, thinking, feeling, being, energy that contributes to growth, the process of growth. And of course, Punit, you're right. It may be more and more of your authentic self showing up.
Yeah, that's a lovely answer, Cindy, because I think, the world has all sorts of, it takes all sorts to make the world. And for a lot of people, being authentic does not, come naturally. And there's a lot of holding back. So I think sometimes a shift in being, like you said, allows for that, showing up of that authentic self.
Yeah, absolutely. Punit, you also had another question there around the, have you seen that, Vijay?
Yeah, I
Around
have.
the,
So what's the difference in approach to the who and what as you move from an amateur to masterful coaching? How does mastery look like from the who and what focus?
I'll give a little example from coach training and all the evaluations I do. You get sometimes a new coach, sometimes some new coaches, not all, being quite eager to dive into, oh, I noticed two things. Which one do you want to focus on? Or I noticed two options. Which one do you want to take? Coach, that's you noticing two options, or you noticing two pathways, or two ideas that the client want to work on. How about you ask the client, is there anything else that's showing up for you that you notice too? We don't have to lead the client into that. We could open the question into, is there something else you're noticing? And now design something or craft something around what you noticed and what the client brought in. Now, that's masterful. When you begin to really draw your client in or evoke more awareness or become curious about what the client is offering into what you are noticing. That was just a small example. Vijay, if you can think of another, or coaches, if you can think of other examples, feel free.
Yeah, and I'd like to say, I mean, again, this is sort of a bit personal journey, and also what I've seen with other coach friends. Somewhere, in the early stages or when we get into coaching, right, there is a bit of performance pressure that we all take. We all want aha moments. We all want great messages after the session which says, wow, I mean, that kind of shifted my being and everything else in between. And we all also want, if there are 5 goals the client came up with, that the client should reach all of the 5. So I feel doing the what and looking at issues with a narrow frame certainly happens early on, Puneet. And I think that's also part of the growth journey as a coach, right? Your maturity, your evolution. Because the moment you start looking at the who, you are addressing softer, hazier things, right? It's not as nice and clean cut as a goal that you're working with. But I think doing that hugely takes away any performance anxiety. Once you get used to it, and once you say, it's okay, when I do that, and like Cindy beautifully said, if there's so much of drama going on in the client's life, do you really think they will be able to do justice to, I mean, those goals seem so trivial, right? When there's much deeper existential or other things bogging you down. So I think as you start coaching more masterfully, and which is why, Puneet, I'd really recommend for you to look at the comparative, the new MCC markers have been released by ICF recently. Initially, the only PCC markers, now it's there for ACC and MCC. It's beautiful to see how those markers shift, right? And also what the expectation is. I'm not saying you need to play to those markers, but there is that shift. But I think personally, this is like, the biggest one that happens. You go in open to so many more possibilities. You go in to be okay if the client does not want to address that particular goal, as long as you play that back to the client and the client is in agreement and says, no, I don't want to work on that. That's okay. So I want to share one interesting anecdote that's happened, Cindy, and which is actually quite it's been quite empowering for me and a big learning, which is that I was working and with this very senior leadership client, and the reason this person came into coaching was something X, Y, and Z, right? And as we started getting into it, I would find a lot of detachment from all of that, right? Which seemingly would be important topics for any leader to navigate at that level. And it took me a while to understand that there's a lot else that's going on that is just so much more meaningful for this person. And again, in an organizational context, which was, I think, questioning their whole role and existence. And, it was a huge why question for them, right? That whole purpose and all of that. And as we went along, and believe me, I would say, this is one of those things where I felt early on that I'm actually quite redundant, because all I would do, and I should not say all I would do, or, what I would do would just simply listen.
Yeah.
And playing back the gentle shifts that I would see session to session in this client, movements. And I would just play that back non-judgmentally. And I think that was just what the client really needed, right? That safe space to be able to explore themselves. And then a couple of sessions later, when we said, okay, like you did, saying, okay, when we started, these were there. Shall we get to it? I was actually told and realized that actually these things are not important. I'll figure it out. It's not important for me at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So if I was attached to the what, or I kind of evaluated myself on whether the client made progress on just the what, it's very important ethically for me to bring it back. Right?
Yeah.
But my role ends there. And in resolving the who, the client's what actually kind of just shifted. And that is the power of the coaching space, right? I mean, deep listening, safety, that the trust which we create. It was quite it was quite an empowering experience for me, Cindy, to realize the power of coaching.
Yeah. I feel the same way, Vijay. Honestly, my most ungracious moments in coaching, I call it ungracious, is when I try to ask about a goal too quickly. Like typically I wanted to figure out what does this client want from the session versus listening to all that was on their mind before they actually got into what do they want, that desired outcome. And that's quite normal, right? A lot of times our client come to coaching, they couldn't tell us the issue or the problem that they're facing. It is only in that exploration we look for, or we ask the client questions around the clarity of what do they want to work on. And that process doesn't come quickly, there's no timing for it. Yes, if you're going for a credentialing, of course, you got to do this all within a particular time frame. But in normal coaching, credentialing aside, that process doesn't need to be rushed at all. It's an agreement between you and client. And you can take your time about that.
Yeah, actually slowing down is speeding up in coaching,
Yeah.
And it takes a while to realize that. For sure. And just on the point which you said, I mean, again, let's look at it very, very humanistically. How would I go trust a stranger to expose the most deepest, darkest, safest places of myself? That unraveling happens only with trust. And when things get built up, right? I mean, you might have great coaching credentials. You may be like, rock star coach. For that client, it doesn't matter. They still figure it out. And that's why that patience is important to earn the trust of your client and the client to feel safe enough to do that. It's easier to talk cognitive stuff, right? It's difficult to talk emotions.
It is. Which is why we sometimes say, my client had so much to say. It's easier to unpack that, all the cognitive stuff, all the thinking, all the information and details they want to say. And how lovely it is to kind of take a slow moment and go, and in all that details that you just shared, if you took a moment and thought about it, is there any new thinking showing up?
Yeah.
Because I'd have to stop the client to take a moment to really think about that and share with you. And maybe there is, right? As they told the story within a safe space, maybe something new would be showing up.
Yeah.
But are we already reaching the end of the time that?
Yes, we are. And I'm just seeing if there are, one or two important questions or that we've missed. I'm just going to quickly look at that. I think there was one that I saw and yeah. And this is from Ilona, if I've pronounced the name right. Often I hear, no, that's all I can come up with when I ask, is there something else that you're seeing in addition to these two topics? Is that okay? Or you leave it to that, even if you see there might be something there? Any ideas how to proceed? Additional questions or just leave it be?
But that's a lovely question, right? It's like the I don't knows in coaching. So coaches, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Johari's window or Heisberg model that goes into what's below the surface. Johari's windows, what is known and what's the unknowns that's going to show up. So when client says that's all I can think about or I don't know, it's an opportunity for more to show up in the session, for something more. So I would offer that to the client. I would say something like, oh, I'm hearing that, there's going to be a lot of unknowns showing up in today's session, and I'll offer to them or invite them, where should we start this exploration? Or which piece do you want us to talk about first? And let's see what more shows up or what's the unknown showing up today.
There's another question, and I think that's also a lovely question, that comes up often in coaching. How do you respond to clients who say they're uncomfortable with the mention of emotions? I think we've all faced clients like that, right, Cindy?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go two ways. If there's enough trust built, you can reassure the client that it is a safe space and they can share emotions. And you can ask, alternatively, if the client really doesn't want to, then just go ahead with encouraging thinking. And in the thinking, something is going to show up around their feelings, emotions, or their energy. It doesn't necessarily have to be a feeling question. You can always pick up, it sounds like as you said those words, there was more energy in you, your tone had changed. And whenever a client speaks about energy, there's always some emotion attached to that, like excitement, relief. However the energy is, there's some emotion attached to it.
Yeah, I love your answer, Cindy. And just adding on to that, I think there's a difference, right? Between asking, a feeling question, which means that you are trying to, invite answers that come from a space of the heart and feelings, right? That's one part. But it's quite rare in a 60-minute conversation for even the most, uncomfortable with emotions clients not to get into a moment of emotions. And I think that's where your connectedness as a coach comes in, where you can, again, non-judgmentally observe that, play it back, or simply let it pass. And I go back to, we got a minute and I'll probably close with this, that, the who of the client, and somebody mentioned attachment styles. I'd like to talk about learning styles. The biggest sort of payback of, being comfortable with the who of the client and taking the exploration there is you get to understand the learning styles of the client, and which is so important because coaching itself is a learning journey. And, some people learn with emotions from the head, from their heart, some learn from their head, some learn from their gut, some learn from their body. It is just so important to understand where that learning comes. And so if you have somebody who is more head-centered or, more gut-centered, then you play to that style.
Yeah.
And I'd be totally
Absolutely.
okay if they don't want to go into an emotional place. But 9 out of 10 times, again, like what you said, based on the trust, let's remember, everybody, every human being, the biggest learning from me as a coach, over the years, everybody wants somebody to talk to, somebody who they can trust, somebody who's not attached to the outcomes.
Absolutely.
And we as coaches can do that if we are true to our craft.
You participants to check with you. We'd love to know what you're taking away today, what you want to build on for yourself as you continue coaching. And of course, we'll pick this conversation up again in different ways and forms. This is only the first webinar for the year. As Kiva said, our webinars are changing. We intend next week to open it up, or next one, for masters to open it up so that we can do some live, interactive, or breakout room work. Wonderful being with you all, and we'll continue growing together as coaches.
Thank you, Cindy, for this beautiful opportunity. It's always a pleasure to dialogue and partner and dance with you. And thank you, Kocharya, for always having me here and giving me the space to share. Thank you.
I'd say thank you to you, Vijay. That was beautifully, partnering. And, I'll dance with you anytime on a webinar. Live too, if you got the chance, right?
And I think we'd all love to dance with you both together, because I think it's been absolutely amazing listening to this conversation today, and I've had such amazing thoughts being shared by all the participants. Thank you so much, Vijay, and thank you so much, Cindy, for this webinar today.
Thank you, Kiva.
Most welcome. And I'm supposed to have mentioned our team coaching to everyone. I forgot, Kiva. Coaches, if you're interested in team coaching that meets the requirements of our new, of ICF new team coaching credentialing, please send Kiva or the office a message. We have a program coming up that's going to be facilitated by both Ram and I. Yeah, maybe you'll join us as guest on the program, right, Vijay?
Oh, absolutely.
There we
Great
go.
topic, right? Great theme. So
Yeah.
and a program with Ram and Cindy, the as they say, the OG combination. It's got to be quite amazing. So I'd love to sneak my way in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you again next month.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.
See you all.